Amina felt the floor give way beneath her as the scissors slipped from her fingers and the classroom went suddenly, breathlessly silent. Someone had screamed. She couldn't tell if it was inside her head or somewhere behind the rows of desks. Papers fluttered like wounded birds. She stared at the tiny glinting blade on the linoleum and realized with a cold certainty that she had just cut more than fabric. She had cut the seam that held her life together. Amina had been the kind of teacher who believed in small mercies, extra pencils on a Monday, a quiet word for a struggling student, sticky notes folded into little surprises on test days. She had spent 10 years building a classroom that smelled of chalk and cinnamon, a refuge where nervous teenagers learned verbs and the unspoken rules of being human. But she had also inherited a school that survived on whispers and after-hours bargains, a place where reputations were currency and silence was an expectation. The morning had started ordinary enough. Amina arrived before dawn to iron the paper banners she and her students would hang, humming the same nervous tune she mouthed before every parent meeting. The assistant principal had waved without making eye contact. The literature club's poster still had lipstick smudges from last night's planning session. She supervised a pop quiz with hands shaking and returned to her desk to find a note that read, simply, "Check the drawer." Her drawer rarely held anything more than old red pens and dreams of summer. This time, beneath stale gum and a forgotten roll of tape, lay a folded photo, grainy, black and white, of her class 2 years ago. Someone had drawn a circle around one student and written a single word, betrayer. Amina's fingers tightened. Whoever had left it had watched long enough to remember details only a teacher would, who sat in the back, who doodled during lectures, who ate sometimes and who didn't. She should have been angry. Instead, she felt betrayed herself because she had always believed the worst violence her classroom contained was an argument over a window seat. The word betrayer unlocked a corridor of memory she had tried to break up. The time she had reported a favored parent as theft at a fundraiser, the secret meeting where she had sided with one colleague over another, the 10 small refusals that had piled into one official reprimand. Maybe someone had kept score. As the days spilled on, the circle in that photograph spread like an infection. Students began to exchange looks that tasted of accusation. A whisper moved through desks and found Amina like a cold draft. A group of girls who had once laughed at her jokes now watched her with a clinical interest. A boy she had once helped through detention left a paper hug on her desk, folded into something like apology and something like warning. Later, a new note on the faculty board read, "Truth Hour Friday 3 p.m. No author, only a promise of revelation." Her chest thudded. The principal's office had a faint new smell, lemon cleaner and tension. People pretended not to notice the storm gathering. In hallways, conversations stopped when she approached, as if the air itself recognized the danger and hushed. Amina's life had always been boundary work. How much to care, how much to hold back, how to protect herself yet remain available. She had been raised by a mother who measured love by the neatness of laundry and the timing of meals. Affection had come in practical things, not proclamations. Amina translated quiet into proof of stability, grades, punctuality, a home-cooked lunch for the substitute. She did not understand until that day that quiet could become a weapon aimed at her. She tried to be strategic. She scanned her class list for clues, flagged handwriting that matched the note, and checked camera feeds that were oddly blank for the morning. She remembered the week before when a new student had joined the elective, a shadow who sat 3 rows behind and watched everything with an odd, polite intensity. Amina had smiled at her, handed her a folder. The girl's name was Noor. Noor said little, but had an observant tilt to her chin, like someone cataloging useful things. Days mounted. Someone began editing the class blog to post private essays as public confessions. Kids she trusted faced cold shoulders. Desks were rearranged. Photos were scrawled with words. Amina had never imagined her students would write about one another. Her authority felt slippery, like smooth rock underwater. The staff meeting that week dissolved into pointed glances and nervous laughter. The vice principal whispered that the school would handle it internally. The phrase felt like a trapdoor labeled with politeness. Sleep became a series of shallow, watched naps. She awoke at 3 in the morning with the memory of scissors, the circle on the photograph, the echo of that first silence. She started to write in a little notebook observations, names, times, as if recording would prevent dissolving. Her handwriting trembled. There was a sister she called in the evenings. They spoke in softened language of relatives who had always known each other's small betrayals. Amina found herself explaining things she had never thought to justify. Why she had reported the parent. Why she had said no to extra funding favors. Her sister's silence on the phone was a kind of counsel, not to overreact, but not to ignore. The turning point came during a parent-teacher evening when Lucia, usually sunny, burst into a confession. She had found another photo in the locker room showing a teacher marked as complicit. She cried, and the auditorium hummed with speculation. What no one noticed, busy watching the gym's falling light, was the tiny scrap of paper sliding from beneath the stage like a timid moth. It fluttered into the aisle and into Amina's path. On it, scrawled in an unfamiliar hand, was a list of names, students and teachers, and next to each a single sharp word: isolate, expose, destroy. That night she dreamt of rows of chairs arranged like teeth. In the dream, the chairs spoke, and every time one spoke, someone she loved vanished. She awoke with a rasp and the sudden necessity of action. For years, she had believed in steady calendars and quiet correction. Now she considered deception as a tool. She would learn to lie convincingly, to preempt the labyrinth they were building. She would pull threads from outside the classroom, contact parents, check archives, track the account that edited essays. Amina understood, with frost-clear clarity, that this was no ordinary school conflict. Someone wanted to rearrange the moral furniture of the place so completely that everything familiar would tip into chaos. She had built identity within those walls, and now they were being used to unmake her. But identity is malleable. She could be torn down and remade. The scissors had cut the seam. The question was, who would sew it back together, and what would they sew into its stitches? Layla woke to a message that made her blood run slow. Someone had uploaded a classroom clip with her voice edited into a cruel joke. The notification pulsed like a small, accusing heart. She lived alone in a fifth-floor apartment lined with books about social experiments and empathy. That morning sunlight slanted through blinds in unkind stripes, as if the world had decided to speak in bars. She felt suddenly exposed, as if someone had peeled back a layer of skin to check the truth beneath. Layla taught psychology electives, the kind of teacher who taught students to notice small patterns and to name shame. She believed in ordinary redemption, small apologies, clear rules, and quiet repair. The school had been her laboratory and sanctuary for years, a place where teenagers learned the language of feelings. Now that language was being weaponized. A smear account trimmed her lessons into mockery and posted them to groups that liked to watch people fail. Her students began to mimic the clip, repeating the edited phrase between classes like a chant. She walked into the classroom the way one walks into a thin, storm-steady, contained human. A student raised a hand and asked, "Did you say this about us?" The question landed like a stone in clear water. Ripples spread. Layla answered as she always had honestly, with a short explanation about context, then watched the explanation be replayed later as if it were proof of cruelty. The principal sent a polite email urging calm. Behind that calm, Layla sensed an architecture of avoidance. Administrators would not fan a rumor if it might scorch the school's image. For the first time, she felt herself making a plan that felt like a lie. It was not the big moral betrayals she feared. It was the slow erosion of trust. She started to record her lessons, not to prove herself to strangers, but to keep a ledger of truth in case memory was contested. She asked the class to write anonymous reflections about moments they regretted, thinking that honesty might reveal who was learning cruelty and who was inventing it. The papers came back raw, messy, with adolescent confessions and surprising clarity. Some students wrote about stealing small things, others about turning jokes into cruelty to fit in. One entry shifted something inside her. It read, "We learned to laugh when the teacher flinched." The sentence felt like both accusation and diagnosis. Layla thought of the summer mentorship program she had supervised last year, a week of exercises meant to encourage leadership. One of the mentors, a quiet woman named Mira, had recommended role play that encouraged confrontation. Layla remembered the exercises fondly. Students had seemed engaged, practiced the art of challenge. Now she wondered whether rehearsal had taught cruelty rather than resilience. At a faculty meeting, a colleague joked that students were performing adolescence. Layla saw performance in the hallway, but sensed orchestration. She confided in the school counselor, Jonah, who had the patient voice of someone used to listening to secrets. Jonah suggested a restorative circle. "Bring them together," he said. "Let them speak." Layla agreed, though she worried that speaking might be what the orchestrator wanted. The thought tightened her jaw. Some forces fed on confession like oil feeds fire. The next day, the school network glitched. An app that usually displayed secure announcements began showing edited images, photos of teachers with captions that twisted their words. A student named Kieran, once shy and careful, walked up to Layla after class and said, "Someone told me to watch you. They said you'll fold." His voice trembled somewhere between fear and bravado. Layla felt a maternal protectiveness she had not expected. She wanted to pull him aside and tell him it would be okay, but she also wanted to teach him how to choose courage that didn't bite others. Layla and Jonah organized the restorative circle in the library, chairs arranged in a careful ring. Some students refused to come. Cameras watched from corners as always, but now their lenses felt like judgments. The first confessions were small and impersonal: petty theft, lying about homework. Then a boy spoke about laughing when another student cried. The room shifted. The boy's voice scraped against something. It was then that Layla noticed a pattern in the room's silences, people holding their breath to avoid being noticed or to conceal complicity. After the session, Layla stayed late. She reviewed security footage, watching faces move in small arcs of habit. She rewound to the mentorship week and noticed a cluster of students who had seemed particularly influenced by one mentor's exercises. She compared names with the list that had circulated earlier and felt a cold knot form inside her. If cruelty could be taught in a week, what else had been taught in whispers and dares? She called Mira and left a message that was more measured than she felt. Could they meet to discuss the exercises and their effects? At home, Layla received an anonymous delivery, a small music box that played a cheerful tune. Inside, a scrap of paper read, "Stop pulling threads." The box was harmless, infantilizing, and menacing all at once. Her hands shook as she tucked the box into a drawer. Fear had become a steady companion, but not a paralyzing one. It sharpened her senses. She decided to speak to parents openly, to invite witnesses into the conversation, to ask for adults who had seen children change in minor but telling ways. Transparency felt like armor. Parent-teacher night arrived under low clouds that made the gym feel like a theater. Some parents came with folded arms, others with weary expectation. Layla spoke about empathy exercises and the difference between role play and real behavior. She watched faces in the crowd, the same faces that watched her in the hallways. Afterward, a woman approached with exhaustion more than accusation. Her son, she admitted, had been involved in games that taught cruelty as a joke. She had ignored it because it seemed harmless. Now she had realized it had become something else. Late that night, Layla found new evidence. A network of fake parent profiles sending accusations and sowing suspicion. The digital architecture of the campaign was broader than she imagined. Whoever orchestrated it understood how to weaponize shame and how to harvest reactions. Layla felt the impulse to run, to leave the building that had grown poisonous. Instead, she sat with the proof and made a list. Evidence to gather, adults to involve, patterns to name. She would recruit allies carefully and confront what she had allowed in the name of pedagogical openness. In the small hours, she walked the empty halls, shoes echoing like a metronome. The school smelled of bleach and lost papers. She passed classrooms where the lights were off and imagined the faces that had hardened into mockery and the ones softened by remorse. Layla allowed herself, finally, to feel anger, not the raw kind that wrecks, but a purposeful anger that plans. She would not let orchestrated cruelty become a curriculum. She would document, recruit, and confront. The night made her steady. The gym smelled of rain and floor polish the morning Hana arrived, carrying a substitute's clipboard like a borrowed identity. She had been called in on short notice. The district needed a stand-in while rumors at the school thickened like unspent thunder. Hana had not taught in 3 years. She had taken leave to recover from burnout and a quiet divorce, had promised herself never to return to the machinery of teenage tempers and institutional indifference. But a phone call the night before, laced with the urgency of need, had drawn her back. From the moment she stepped through the doors, she sensed the strange gravity here, the hush that followed her footsteps, the way students' conversations would halt mid-sentence and resume in coded murmurs. In the staff room, a young counselor named Jonah offered her tea and a brief explanation. 2 teachers had come under attack, not by fists, but by rumor and subtle sabotage. The air of distrust was spreading. Hana nodded, the weight of it sitting on her chest like a wet coat. Her first class stared at her as if measuring her for inclusion or for expulsion from some secret game. She introduced herself plainly. "I'm here for a while. We're going to keep learning." Her voice was steady, though inside she was acutely aware of her own vulnerability. The students did not misbehave overtly. Instead, they performed an almost polite disengagement, eyes sliding away when she called on them, lips curling in half-suppressed amusement when she made a point. She had seen this before in other schools, a collective rehearsal for cruelty. At lunch, Hana lingered in the hallway and noticed a small girl with dark braids tearing a page from her notebook and slipping it into a locker. When Hana approached the girl, startled, and muttered about returning a borrowed worksheet, there was something too rehearsed in her explanation. Hana said nothing, only smiled and passed by. She had learned that young conspirators thrived on confrontation. In the evening, she stayed late to prepare lesson notes. A storm rattled the windows and the corridors hummed with the low sound of pipes. As she left, she saw a flyer half peeled from the bulletin board. Truth Hour Friday, 3 p.m. She had heard the phrase before in whispers, a ritualized confrontation the students had promised each other. She wondered if the staff understood that children, too, could build cults of judgment. That night in her small apartment, Hana found herself writing a letter to her younger self, a practice she had once recommended to students battling anxiety. "Do not expect to be believed," she wrote. "Do not imagine that kindness will protect you. It is still worth offering." She tore the letter into pieces but kept the memory of its words as if they were an oath. The next morning the principal introduced Hana at a faculty meeting. The room held a brittle courtesy. Amina, the literature teacher at the center of the early conflict, looked pale but composed. Layla from psychology sat with arms folded, a quiet resolve in her posture. Hana noticed the way other teachers looked at them, some with sympathy, others with the wary curiosity people reserved for those marked by a scandal. During class, a boy named Kieran lingered after the bell. He was thin, with restless hands. "They'll test you too," he said in a near whisper. "They want to see if you'll join." When Hana asked who they were, he shook his head and left. The words left a trace of chill behind. Hana knew that in schools power often shifted in shadows, not in official announcements. That afternoon, Hana discovered the first open act of defiance. On the whiteboard, someone had written in red marker, "A teacher's lesson turned U.S. cruel." The handwriting was large, childish yet deliberate. She erased it without comment while the class watched. For the rest of the period, a few students exchanged glances and smothered smiles, as if they had thrown a stone and waited to hear the sound of breaking glass. At a staff briefing, Jonah suggested creating small peer support groups for students who felt targeted. Some colleagues dismissed the idea as soft. Hana said little. She had learned that survival often began with listening more than speaking. She did, however, request access to the older discipline records. That evening she went through them in the library, noting patterns, names that appeared in unrelated incidents, dates that coincided with mentorship workshops, small infractions that hinted at rehearsal for bigger harm. As the week wore on, Hana grew to respect Amina's endurance and Layla's quiet anger. Each of them carried their wounds differently. Amina turned to meticulous order, Layla to late-night investigations. Hana offered something else, an unhurried attention, a way of watching that sometimes unsettled students who were used to teachers reacting rather than observing. Thursday afternoon brought a new escalation. A video circulated among students showing a dramatized reenactment of the original rumor, with actors wearing crude paper masks of real teachers. The laughter in the hallway was louder than usual, a brittle, braying sound. Hana confiscated one phone, then another, but the video had already seeped into the school's bloodstream. She glimpsed in the corner of the screen a logo she did not recognize, an emblem like an unblinking eye. That night she searched online but found nothing certain. On Friday morning she found another note on her desk. "Welcome to Truth Hour." This one was written in neat block letters, folded into an origami swan. She set it aside and went on with her lesson. Beneath her calm she felt a quiet dread. She sensed that the promised hour was not merely a prank but a ceremony. When the clock struck 3, the gym began to fill. Students gathered in clusters, some whispering, some restless. A few parents had come after hearing rumors. Teachers stood at the edges, uncertain whether to intervene or to watch. At the center of the gym floor, a single chair had been placed under the spotlight of a portable lamp. A tall student in a dark hoodie stepped forward and read a list of accusations against unnamed teachers: favoritism, humiliation, betrayal. Each charge was met with a ripple of murmurs. Hana noticed that the students delivering the accusations never named themselves as witnesses. They spoke as though a collective voice had borrowed their throats. When the meeting dissolved into noise, Hana approached the group calmly and asked simple questions. Who started this ritual? When did the first flyer appear? The students avoided her eyes. One girl muttered, You wouldn't understand. We're just telling the truth." Hana heard in the girl's tone the echo of something older than the rumor, something taught. That evening, long after the gym had emptied, Hana stood alone in the center of the court. The lamp still shone on the single chair. The rain tapped against the high windows. She thought of all the teachers she had known who had believed that knowledge alone could guide behavior. She understood now that understanding did not automatically lead to kindness. Someone had learned to use the very tools of empathy to twist trust. She resolved to speak the next day with Amina and Layla together. The conflict was no longer a series of isolated incidents, but a campaign. To face it, they would need not only evidence, but also solidarity, a shared refusal to be remade in the shape their accusers wanted. The rain had passed, but the sky above the school still held the color of wet ash when Naomi entered the building. As the newly appointed counselor, she had been called in by the district to stabilize the escalating unrest. Naomi had the steady calm of someone who had spent years listening to grief and anger without letting it drown her. Yet as soon as she stepped into the hallway, she sensed the tension thrumming like a hidden wire. Her first appointment that morning was with a boy named Kieran, the same student who had quietly warned Hana days before. He sat stiffly in the counseling chair, avoiding her gaze. Naomi asked gentle, open-ended questions about the so-called truth hour. Kieran shrugged at first, then said in a low voice, "It started as a dare. We thought it was a game. Then someone older told us it was a way to fix the school. To make them pay. Make who pay?" Naomi asked. Kieran looked at the carpet. "The teachers. They lie to us. They say they care, but they don't. We just wanted the truth." Naomi took a slow breath. She recognized the anger of adolescents looking for a cause, but there was something rehearsed in his tone, as if he had been repeating a line given to him. She didn't press him further. Trust was more important than extracting a confession. Later that morning, she observed Hana's class. The students sat rigid, pretending to focus on their books. Naomi noted this silence between their exchanged glances, the unspoken conversation of allies plotting in code. She made a mental note to watch the girl with the braids who laughed once too sharply when Hana dropped a marker. In the faculty lounge, Naomi met Amina and Layla for the first time. Amina looked tired but held herself upright with the dignity of someone refusing to crumble. Layla's eyes were restless, scanning the room as if expecting another blow. They spoke briefly about the upcoming weekend, how the school's reputation had begun to appear in online forums, parents questioning their children's safety. "Something about this feels organized," Naomi said softly. "These students didn't invent this ritual on their own. Someone taught them how to turn doubt into accusation." Amina nodded. "I used to believe they just misunderstood us. Now I'm not so sure." Layla leaned forward. "I've been tracing the origin of those flyers. The paper, the printing. Somebody had access to the school staff printer at night. This is coordinated." Naomi absorbed the information silently. She had handled bullying, cyber harassment, even threats. But this campaign had the structure of a movement. That afternoon, she conducted a group session with 5 students who had been named in minor disciplinary notes. They were a mix of nervous and bold, but all of them showed the same flicker of pride when the truth hour was mentioned. Naomi asked them why they thought it was necessary. One girl replied, "We're finally making them listen. They always tell us what to do, what to think. Now it's our turn." Another boy added, "It's like a trial. We show them who they really are." Naomi said nothing at first, letting their words fill the quiet room. Then she said gently, "Trials have rules to protect the innocent. Who protects you if the accusation is wrong?" The question left a momentary hush. Then the bold girl said, "We protect each other." Naomi wrote in her notes, "Group loyalty outweighs individual doubt." That night, Naomi stayed late in her small office, reading through the history of the school's social clubs and archived newsletters. A pattern began to emerge. 2 years ago, a philosophy teacher, now transferred, had run an informal discussion group about honesty and moral courage. Some of the older students had been part of it. The group had disbanded quietly, but perhaps the seeds had remained. As midnight approached, Naomi heard footsteps in the hall. She stepped out and saw Layla carrying a box of old files toward the counselor's office. "Couldn't sleep," Layla murmured. "I think the answer is in these old incident reports." Together they sat on the floor, spreading papers in piles. They found references to a former student named Elias, who had been expelled 3 years earlier for leading a truth circle that had turned into harassment of a teacher. No one had connected that history to the current campaign. Naomi felt a chill. Movements rarely died. They went underground and resurfaced in new forms. She suspected Elias's ideas had become folklore among certain students, passed down like a dangerous story. The next day, Naomi asked the principal for permission to host an open forum with parents. The principal hesitated, worrying it might inflame tensions. Naomi insisted gently that silence was the real fuel for fear. The forum was scheduled for Sunday evening in the gym. On Saturday, Naomi walked the quiet corridors alone. The rain had returned, streaking the windows, muffling the sound of her footsteps. In one corner near the art room, she found a mural newly painted overnight, a faceless teacher kneeling before a crowd of children holding torches. The art was rough, but the message unmistakable. Someone had taken the ritual out of whispers and given it a banner. In the late afternoon, she sat with Amina and Hana in the empty library. The 3 women shared coffee and quiet stories of their early days as teachers, why they had chosen this profession in the first place. It was a moment of fragile solidarity, a reminder of the humanity they were fighting to protect. Naomi told them about Elias and the old truth circle. "Movements like this feed on the feeling that no one listens," she said. "If we can show them we're listening, maybe we can turn it." Hana's eyes were thoughtful. "And if they don't want to be turned?" Naomi looked at the rain against the windows. "Then we need to show them there's another kind of truth. One that isn't born out of fear." That evening she drafted a letter to the parents, careful to use words that invited conversation rather than blame. She printed copies herself and posted them on the school's bulletin board. Sunday's forum began under a tense sky. Parents sat in rows of folding chairs, some defensive, some frightened. The students who had come stood together at the back, united in posture if not in voice. Naomi stepped to the front, speaking not as an authority, but as a witness. She told them what she had seen, the confusion, the hurt, the hunger for a voice. She urged the adults to guide that hunger before it turned to harm. Some parents nodded. Others crossed their arms. A few demanded punishment for the ringleaders. Naomi did not promise punishment or pardon. She promised attention. That night, she knew they had only taken the first step in untangling the web. When she left the gym, the rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking apart, showing a thin sliver of moon. Naomi stood there for a moment, breathing in the damp, cool air. She felt the fragile weight of hope pressing against the darker tide. Change, she knew, would not come in a single meeting. But she also knew that a single voice, steady and patient, could begin to weaken the hold of a cruel story. The Monday after the parent forum, the sky over the school was an unsettling pale blue, too bright for winter, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Selene stood at the edge of the staff parking lot gripping a steaming cup of coffee that had already gone lukewarm. She was the school's media studies teacher, quiet by nature, often overlooked by her colleagues. But over the weekend, a parent had forwarded her a link to a private video channel, and Selene had not slept much since. The videos were not the usual teenage pranks. They were edited montages of teachers' lessons cut into fragments and rearranged to suggest ridicule, hypocrisy, even cruelty. Each video ended with the same stark phrase, in white letters on a black screen, "The lesson that turned us." Some clips were clearly staged with actors. Others were taken secretly during class. The production had an eerie sophistication, good lighting, deliberate pacing, subtle music that swelled just enough to make the audience feel righteous anger. Selene had spent much of the previous night trying to trace the origin of the uploads, but the channel had no clear owner. The oldest video, posted 3 months ago, featured a grainy image of a boy wearing a hood and a half-mask made from torn notebook paper. She suspected this was the same Elias whom Naomi had mentioned. In the morning staff meeting, she spoke up, her voice trembling but determined. "These videos aren't just rumors. They're propaganda. Someone shaping the story. We have to respond before it becomes the only version of the truth the students believe." The principal frowned. "Respond how? We can't start a public war with students. That will feed their narrative." Naomi, sitting beside Hana and Amina, said quietly, "We need facts. Selene, can you help us figure out who's behind the videos?" Selene nodded. She wasn't an investigator by trade, but she knew enough about media to recognize patterns filters, timestamps, the digital fingerprints most amateurs overlooked. That afternoon, she stayed in her classroom after the final bell, scrolling through the videos frame by frame. She noticed that in several clips, a mural of the school's east hallway appeared faintly in the background. The mural had been painted only a year ago. This meant the footage was recent and had been shot on campus. The next clue came in the form of a brief reflection in a window during a panning shot. Just a flicker, but Selene froze the frame. A student in a dark hoodie holding a phone, and beside him the braided girl Hana had once noticed by the lockers. Selene exhaled slowly. She did not feel triumph, only a tightening in her chest. Children were leading this campaign, but someone older had taught them how to tell a story like this. At dusk, Selene met Naomi in the counselor's office. The lamp on the desk cast a warm halo between them as Selene showed her the still frames. Naomi leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "We'll need to approach this carefully. If we accuse them without proof, it will only strengthen their cause. I don't want them punished," Selene said, surprising herself with the softness of her voice. "I want them to see what they've become." Later that evening, Selene walked home through damp streets. She lived in a modest apartment a few blocks from the school. On her doorstep, she found a small envelope without a stamp. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a sentence typed in bold. "The lesson is almost complete." Her breath hitched. She looked around, but the street was empty, the lamplight still and unblinking. She called Naomi immediately. "They know I'm watching," she said. "Stay calm," Naomi replied. "We'll meet in the morning. Don't let fear write the next chapter for you." That night, Selene barely slept. She dreamed of standing in front of a classroom where the desks were empty, but the shadows of students leaned forward as if listening. The next morning, she brought her laptop to the teacher's lounge. Amina and Hana joined them, along with Naomi. Together, they examined the videos again, looking for overlooked details. Amina spotted something in one of the earliest clips, a fragment of a poster on the wall behind the speaker's shoulder. The poster advertised a now-closed community center on the edge of town, a place known for offering cheap space for student clubs. Selene suggested they visit after school. The community center was a squat brick building with a faded mural of children holding books and flowers. The doors were locked, but through a dusty window, they could see abandoned chairs stacked against a wall and a makeshift backdrop painted black. Naomi made a note to contact the landlord. They were still peering through the window when a voice behind them said, "You're wasting your time." It was Kieran, standing awkwardly with his hood up, hands shoved into his pockets. He looked smaller than Selene remembered from her class. "Why are you here?" Naomi asked gently. Kieran shifted from foot to foot. I just come here sometimes. We used to meet here before they closed it. Elias started everything here." Selene's pulse quickened. "Is Elias still in town?" Kieran shook his head. "I don't know. He sent messages. Told us teachers never listen. Said we had to teach them instead. But it's different now. Some kids just want to scare you." Naomi stepped closer. "You can choose not to be part of that." Kieran looked away. "It's not that easy. Some of them say if we stop, we become traitors." The boys' words lingered as they walked back to the school in silence. That evening, Selene returned to her classroom to gather her things and found the whiteboard covered in bold red letters. "History will remember who stood with U.S. The smell of the marker was still sharp, meaning whoever had written it had been there recently. She stared at the words for a long time, then quietly began to erase them. She felt a strange mixture of sadness and determination. She had chosen to teach media because she believed stories could reveal the truth about people. Now she saw how stories could be used to trap them. When she finally left the school, the night air was cold and still. Across the parking lot, she noticed a figure standing beneath a street lamp, the same braided-hair girl, watching her silently. Selene raised a hand in greeting, but the girl turned and disappeared into the shadows. Selene stood there for a moment longer, then headed home. She knew the final confrontation was coming soon, but she also knew that saving the students would mean giving them a new story one that could outshine the cruel narrative they had been taught. The winter morning dawned with a pale gold light that felt almost deceptive, too gentle for what was about to come. Iris stood at the entrance of the school gym, her fingers clutching a small notebook so tightly the edges bent beneath her grip. She was the new interim principal brought in by the district after the board had decided the crisis needed a firmer hand. Iris had a reputation for restoring order to fractured schools. Yet, as she surveyed the empty bleachers and the scuffed floor of the gym, she felt a flicker of doubt. This school was not simply disordered. It had been taught to feed on its own fear. She had spent the weekend reading every report Naomi, Selene, Hana, and Amina had compiled pages of notes on the Truth Hour ritual, on Elias's history, on the videos, and on the quiet defiance in the classrooms. She had gone over the parent forum transcript twice and underlined one phrase that kept returning like an echo. "We just want the truth." Iris believed in truth, but she also knew it could be twisted. As a young teacher years ago, she had witnessed how a single rumor about a kind man accused of favoritism had shattered a school community. She carried the lesson still. Silence lets the cruelest story take root. That morning, before the first bell, Iris called a private meeting in the library with Naomi, Selene, Hana, and Amina. The 5 women formed a quiet circle at a long oak table. Iris listened more than she spoke, asking pointed questions. What do we know about the braided girl? Who still communicates with Elias? What did the students believe they're achieving? Selene described the videos in detail. Naomi explained the group loyalty she had observed in the counseling sessions. Hana spoke of the coded looks between students, and Amina described the slow erosion of her authority in class. Each voice added a piece to the picture, a puzzle of manipulated trust. "We need to give them another kind of truth," Iris said finally. "Not by accusing or punishing first. We must let them confront the whole story themselves." The others looked at her with a mix of hope and weariness. They had been fighting so long that the idea of a resolution felt almost foreign. By mid-morning, Iris requested an all-school assembly. The announcement spread quickly, sparking ripples of curiosity and unease among the students. Rumors flared. Some said the principal was going to expel the ringleaders. Others claimed the teachers were about to confess their crimes. The assembly began after lunch. The gym filled with students, parents, and staff, their voices buzzing in restless anticipation. The braided hair girl sat near the front with a small group of friends, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on the stage. Kieran lingered near the back, hands in his pockets, avoiding eye contact with the others. Iris stepped up to the microphone. Her presence was steady, her tone measured. "I've heard a lot about truth in this school," she began. "Truth is not a weapon. Truth is what lets us see each other as we are, not as we've been told to see. Today, you will hear the whole story." The gym quieted. Iris gestured toward Selene, who projected several still images from the propaganda videos onto a screen. Then Selene played brief clips side by side with the original, unedited classroom footage that revealed how the videos had been manipulated, pauses removed, words rearranged. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Naomi spoke next, not accusing anyone but describing how fear and anger can be turned into loyalty for the wrong cause. "We all want to be heard," she said. "But if we only listen to the angriest voice, we end up following anger instead of reason." Hana shared what she had seen in her first day, students rehearsing their defiance, looking for cues from one another. Amina spoke last, quietly recounting the harm of being misrepresented, and yet refusing to hate the students who had done it. "We are still here to teach you," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in it. A long silence followed. Then, unexpectedly, Kieran stood. His voice was unsteady but loud enough to carry. "We thought we were fixing something. We thought we were brave. But we were just copying a story that wasn't even ours." His words hung in the air like a fragile thread. The braided girl shifted in her seat, her jaw tightening. She whispered something to her friend but did not stand. Iris stepped forward again. "The truth is that this school belongs to all of us students and teachers. We can't rebuild it by tearing each other apart. We will not hold another truth hour. We will hold a listening hour instead. Every voice is welcome, but every claim must face evidence." Some students nodded. Others stared at the floor. A few whispered in protest, but the collective tension had shifted. The air no longer bristled with anticipation of attack, but with the uncertainty of choice. After the assembly dispersed, Iris noticed Kieran lingering by the stage. She approached him gently. "Thank you for speaking," she said. He shrugged. I don't want to keep lying." "You don't have to," Iris said. "But you do have to keep telling the truth, even when it's hard." That evening, the 5 women met again in the library. For the first time in weeks, the room felt lighter. They knew the conflict wasn't over. Some students would cling to the old narrative, but they had opened a door. As they prepared to leave, a janitor entered carrying a box. "Found this in the old supply closet," he said. Inside were several folders labeled Truth Circle in bold marker. Iris exchanged a look with Naomi and Selene. They would go through the files later, but for now the urgency had passed. That night, Iris wrote a short message for the school's website and social channels. "Our school is committed to listening, learning, and facing facts together. We invite parents and students to join our next open discussion." She hit send and closed her laptop with a weary but genuine sense of hope. The winter wind rattled the windows, but the sky above the school cleared, revealing a sharp scatter of stars. For the first time since she arrived, Iris let herself believe that the tide had turned. Change would be slow, but the seed of it had been planted in open ground. If this story moved you, share it with others who believe in understanding over division. Subscribe to the channel for more gripping, suspenseful stories about the psychology of power and trust. Leave a comment with your thoughts. What would you have done in Iris's place? Your voice matters.